And well, what is tokophobia? Well, that is what we're going to be diving into today. The headline being the tokophobia is the pathological fear of pregnancy and birth. But if you think this is a conversation just for women of childbearing age, think again, because this affects everybody. If you've been born, you might have tokophobia, and this will be showing up in all areas of your life without you even realizing. My name's Alexia. I am a specialist in tokophobia. I had tokophobia. I was able to heal this in myself, and I've been healing it in women for over 10 years. So I know this beast intimately from all angles. JJ, my co-host. JJ, who are you?
Who am I? I am that woman who has lived nearly 70 years with tokophobia and only managed to get it out of my life after meeting you about 18 months ago. And my word, what a difference it's made. I didn't have children. I didn't know about it, hadn't even heard the word until I met you about 18 months ago. And so I had no chance, basically, of ever dealing with this or even knowing what it was until then. And when I look back on my life, oh, wow, how it could have been so different. But we'll get into that a bit later on.
Yeah, yeah. So today we really want to just dive into what is tokophobia so that you can really understand what this mental health condition is and start to maybe figure out whether or not you have it, or maybe you know somebody who you suspect might have it. Because as we've said, this is something that a lot of people don't realize they've had. If you've listened to our introductory episode about this series on Tik-Tokophobia, you will know that both of us, well, JJ has said she doesn't know, she didn't know until 18 months ago that she had it. When I had it and I was pregnant, I didn't know I had it. So part of this podcast is about helping people to realize, to self-diagnose, to figure out whether this is something that is affecting them, because you can't go on to heal something if you don't know you have it. Okay. So that's where that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what is it then? Well, the headline is it's a pathological fear of pregnancy and birth, and it leads generally to an avoidance of pregnancy, but so much more. I mean, that's the definition that I think you will hear and read in many places if you Google it, look on Wikipedia, that kind of thing. But my goodness, it's so much more than that, and it's actually a severe anxiety disorder, and and that has so many repercussions. So, JJ, for you, what was tokophobia?
Well, I didn't know I had it, as we've said, until 18 months ago. But looking back over my life, I can tell you it was a belief, not even a fear of having children, but a belief that I would never have children. That installed itself in my head. A feeling of discomfort around babies. If somebody handed me a baby, I'd kind of go, oh, thank you very much, but here, and handed the
Oh,
baby over to somebody else, couldn't quite get the whole thing about babies, that I was just a bit uncomfortable around them. Children, great, once they'd learned to toddle and talk and all of that, fantastic. But the babies, not so much. Always had it in my head that I would never have children. And but yeah, it was far more than that, far more than that. I wasn't even aware of a fear of giving birth. It wasn't even that, didn't even get to that point. It
yeah.
was this, I'm not having children. That's not happening in my life. It's not even a choice. It's just the way it is. And then looking back over my life, what I realized is that where I had been conditioned by this fear, and we'll talk about the fear in a moment, and the anxiety, it's not just a fear of giving birth because you don't want to lose your figure, or you don't want to have a cesarean or something like that. No, this is an abject terror when you think about, not even think about, but when I was once knowingly, the only time I was knowingly pregnant, and looked at the pregnancy test and saw the lines on there and saw that I was pregnant, out of nowhere, this surge of abject terror, such as I'd never experienced knowingly in my life, pulsed through my body, and I didn't know where that came from. And a few days later, I had a miscarriage. Now, I say never knowingly had, but I was born with the cord around my neck, blue baby, put into an oxygen tent for 2 weeks, wasn't held very much, didn't experience all the things that newborn babies experienced. So you can imagine the terror that I would have felt as I was coming out into the world. I suspect that's what I was feeling at that point. It reminded me, it took me back to that. But consciously, I had no memory of it, no knowledge of it. And I think, looking back with hindsight, it has colored everything in my life. Not being able to finish a creative project, my relationships with people, 2 marriages that ended in divorce, everything. So we're not talking about just, but I'm a bit scared because, if I have to have a C-section, or if I have to, do this, that, or the other, I just want it to all just, be happy and flow beautifully and naturally. It's not that kind of fear. It's not that kind of anxiety or worry.
No.
It is the deepest seated thing that you could ever experience, in my experience.
So, and it bypasses the conscious mind. Like you say, it just came from somewhere so deep within you. There was no thinking going on. There's no conscious processing. It came from somewhere entirely different.
Correct.
And it actually came from your body directly. There's no mind processing, conscious processing going on. And that's why this is so misunderstood, so undiagnosed, so nobody's heard of it, because we don't know we've got it, because we don't know where it comes from, because. And when I think about when you described some of your experiences, my experience of having tokophobia was never having the baby conversation, the kids conversation with partners, never thinking that I was like, it was really weird. I knew that I was going to have 2 kids. Like, I always imagined that I was going to have 2 kids, but these 2 kids were in the image that I always think about is I'm on one side of the river, and on the other side of the river, there are those 2 kids. And the river is like this big, surging, like tumultuous mess, the kind of thing that rivers become after loads of rain. And the bridge has been knocked out. Like, there's no way I'm getting across that river. So even though I've got an idea that that's over there, that seems like a really nice place to be, I'm like, well, I can't even get there. There's no way for me to get from here to there. So anything that's required in terms of having 2 kids, sex, marriage, baby conversations, finding somebody, talking that through, planning it, deciding, oh, well, we'll get married and then we'll do this and then we'll have the kids. All of that, none of that happened in my life, because it might lead to kids, which actually is what I wanted, but I couldn't do the river bit. And I couldn't see how I could cross that river. So I never made any attempt to, because it's like, well, I'm not going to jump into a rapidly flowing river. Who's going to do that? They're going to die. That's exactly what I thought, because birth kills. Because I probably had a birth experience too, where I nearly died, or I felt that it was a life-threatening situation. So why the hell would I throw myself into that for me? Because that's where tokophobia mostly comes from. That root trauma is your own birth. Not always, but I would say in my experience of working with this, 80% of the time, it's probably your own birth. And so this is why we don't know we have it, because who remembers their own birth? How do you know that you had the cord wrapped around your neck? Is that a memory for you, or were you told that?
No, I was told that. I mean, I don't remember anything about my birth. Don't remember anything about it.
Yeah, same. Who does? I mean, I don't know anybody who remembers their birth, right?
No,
So
exactly.
how do you know that your birth was a difficult one? And I know that there are some powerful healing approaches where people remember their birth. So if you do holotropic breath work, for example, a lot of people describe reliving and re-experiencing their birth, going through that. And when you go and do those kind of healing processes, it brings to the surface things that need healing. And obviously, because we've all been born, this is an experience that we've all had, the chances are that is an experience that we need to heal, because generally speaking, birth is not always an easy ride for many women. You have 20% of women that say that they have pain-free births. So we can assume that they've prepared, they've done all the things, they've had a good experience. But that doesn't mean the baby experienced it well. That we've got to remember that there's the mother having her experience of birthing her baby. And then there's the child, the baby, and how they experience wriggling down the birth canal and popping out the other end, or being lifted out of the sunroof if it's a C-section. All that experience, we really need to go there and explore that fully, because that has such an impact on who we are. And yet none of us remember that at all.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And all my life, I've looked for this thing. I've done so much work on myself, and I've trained in various things. But, I've trained in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. That's a mind-body connection thing. And, there were lots of things that went back to your birth, and, lots of programs, processes that we did that took us back to pre-birth and all of that. Still never quite touched the sides, if I can put it that way. And I will say, I said to Alexia the other day, her clearing technique for tokophobia is it's like the Heineken of healing techniques, because it does get to the parts that nothing else can get to. I tried so many things. I've trained in so many modalities and gone through so much. And yeah, it's done loads of stuff. But the one thing it didn't reach was the tokophobia.
Yeah,
Yeah, it really is. It's the Heineken of what would you call it?
Yeah.
What do you call it?
Well, it's a modality. I call it head trash clearance, and it really does. That's what it does. It does what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
And when you say it doesn't touch the sides, it's interesting, because that's exactly the words that I use. So when I was pregnant and fearful, and this was my second pregnancy because I lost my first baby. And so the second time I was pregnant, this time I'd done a lot of work before that second pregnancy on myself, on my anxiety. So when I was pregnant, I didn't feel that same wave of terror that hit me the first time. This time I was like, okay, this is good, because I now know I want to be a mum. Now we've had the kids conversation. Now we've had the baby conversation. So that bit's dealt with, and I know I want this, but am I going to be able to do it? No. I'm going to have a C-section. In fact, I want all the drugs, knock me out cold. I don't want to be awake for that experience. Like, can somebody call me later and just hand me the baby? That was my birth plan, except you and I both know that that's not an option.
No,
You have to,
exactly.
C-section, you kind of have to be awake. So, but I was holding out for that's the only way that this is going to happen. Meanwhile, knowing that that is not possible. So I had to find a way. And so when you're fearful and pregnant, you naturally gravitate towards hypnobirthing, which is what I did. I bought the books, I did the hypnobirthing tracks. And that's when I was like, this is not even touching the sides. Like, this is like water off a duck's back. Like, nothing is changing here. And in fact, they were really annoying. Those hypnobirthing tracks really wound me up, because I was like, I am not going to walk across another bloody meadow and imagine this. No, this is not doing anything.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't touching it.
Yeah.
It wasn't touching it. I needed something that was going to go deep down and find whatever the hell this was and clear it. And nothing else was out there. And so that's what I created. And I ended up creating, and that's where the birth of head trash clearance.
Yeah.
And I tested it on myself in my second trimester. And I got to the end of my second trimester and was like, I think I'm going to have a home birth, which is one hell of a 180, right? And so we're going to be talking more about how you can heal from it. And I've got some stories I'm going to be sharing with you around all of this. So yeah, this whole thing about nothing touches the sides is really important, because there are many things that people may pursue out there in the attempt to try and address this, and they won't work. They don't work. And that exacerbates those people that are suffering from this, because they're like, well, this is meant to work. This is what my doctors told me that I should do. And it's not working on me. Well, does that mean it's me? Am I the one that's broken? Is the fault with me? And then at that point, it's like, well, if this was the solution that's been handed to me as the solution to my problem and it's not working on me, then where do I go from here? This is a hopeless situation. How do I get out of this? And that's where I was, where I was like, well, I've got to create the solution, that I've got to find a way. And so that's what I did. Um, but not everybody obviously has done what there's clearly not
No,
many that have decided to do that.
exactly. And we're all in different, we all have different situations in life that we have to go through. And not everybody's in a position
Yeah.
to do what you did, or to have the knowledge or the, the whole load of things come together to
Mm.
enable a person to do what you've done and create head trash clearance. But, for me, it, all the things that conspired around the tokophobia, um, were such that I wasn't in a place where I could go any deeper. I didn't have a long-time partner. My second husband left me because I couldn't have children. Right. So, I've been actually on my own for most of my life.
Mm.
And so there's no backup. There's nobody, holding your hand, not holding your hand, but metaphorically holding your hand, giving you some support. Nobody that I was going to want to try to make plans with to have children. It all came far too late for me.
Yeah.
So, it just wasn't going to happen. And in my early years, as a journalist, and I was just kind of focused on work and keeping up with that, keeping going with that. There wasn't room for
Yeah.
even for the beginnings of this kind of exploration into what might be causing these issues with me, even if I
Mm.
recognized that they were issues, which I didn't until I was much older.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think one thing we need to kind of cover off is how widespread do we think this is? And there is research around tocophobia. There's a lot of research, but what I find interesting and curious is that a lot of this research comes out of schools of midwifery, maternity units. And there's a piece of research that came out in Ethiopia that established that 21% of pregnant women had a severe fear of birth. But that's deeply flawed research. That doesn't tell us how many women suffer from tocophobia, because in order to have made it to pregnancy, there's a lot that are never going to go near pregnancy. There's other research that, there's some other research that says, oh, well, it's estimated it's somewhere between 4 and 43%. Like, what kind of bandwidth is that? Like, and the fact that not a lot of people have heard of it, no one, like, it's not even really recognized for what it is outside of the world of pregnancy and birth. So those people that may be studying anxiety disorders, or they're probably not even looking at it. They don't know about it, so they're not even exploring it. We need to try and understand what percentage of the female population have this. And when I'm seeing statistics that indicate anything between 4 and 40%, I'm thinking, well, I think that's vastly undercooked.
Mm.
When you think there are so many women. Yeah, so if there was any research into the tocophobia, if somebody was like coming across, if you came across somebody that said, oh, I'm doing some research into the rates of tocophobia and the fear of pregnancy and birth, do you want to, like, could you answer some questions for us? You'd be like, why are you asking me? What? And you'd be like, you wouldn't even take part, right? It
Right,
would just,
exactly.
so suddenly you're not being considered. So when we're asking, whatever research is taking place is not being done in a way that is really helping us to understand how widespread this is. And if you are doing research, if anybody's listening to this, screaming at the screen or their phone going, but I am, then please do let me know, because I want to hear about this research. But from what I've looked into and what we've looked into, the research is predominantly focused around schools of midwifery, maternity schools, and pregnancy and birth professionals, not general mental health, general anxiety, and looking at men too, because let's be clear, this affects men as well. Because guess what? Men are also born out of their mother's vagina. It's shocking, isn't it? But this is a human experience.
I
And so they also have probably experienced birth trauma. And while it doesn't get in the way of them birthing babies, it will get in the way of their creative projects. It will get in the way of all the other ways that tokophobia does affect you in life. And so we absolutely need to get a handle on what the rates are, what the prevalence rates are of this anxiety disorder in the general population. And I don't think we have that number. What are your thoughts?
I don't think we do at all. And I think it would be far more prevalent than anybody even considers. And I think what I'd love to see in the research would be the questions like, have you suffered depression in your life? People who have depression, right? Have you suffered depression for any length of time? So, for instance, I was depressed as a child. How many people look into depression in young children? How many people ask where that comes from?
Mm.
It's not always just, oh, I'm not happy at school. I think it's probably something that goes far deeper. So, we're talking about looking at all angles of depression and anxiety, all angles of people not being able to move forward, achieve stuff. So I would like to see one of the first questions in any piece of research is, what was your birth like?
Yeah.
Do you know how your birth impacted you? Was it an easy birth? Was it a difficult birth? How difficult was it? If it was difficult. And that's the number one question, because we know that for a lot of people, most people, it's a traumatic birth that might have set off this pattern in life that goes throughout our lives until it's sorted out.
Yeah. And in fact, I'd probably extend that conversation, that line of questioning to, what was your mother's pregnancy like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because there's 9 months that you're in the womb while you are being made, carried by her. And I know a lot of people aren't ready for this and they don't want to hear this, but the mother's experience of her pregnancy has a direct impact on the baby. What her thoughts are, what her feelings are, whatever is going on. The human being is so intelligent as a life form. The baby is being prepared for the life it is going to meet when it comes out through her while mother is carrying the baby. So whatever she experiences, the baby will experience through her emotions through the umbilical cord. It's going to respond to what she's going through. So there's twofold response going on there. There's the baby feeling and experiencing whatever the mother is going through, because they are, for all intents and purposes, the same body. They are connected through the placenta and the umbilical cord for the whole of that time. So whatever emotions are running through, whatever hormones are running through a system, the baby is getting a wash of that. But then the baby gets to respond to whatever the mother's going through. So the baby will hear loud sounds. Babies don't like going to loud concerts and listening to big, loud movies. We know that. There's a lot of research in prenatal psychology. There's mountains of evidence around all of what I'm saying. So it's worth looking into and understanding. And what I also want to say is, this is not a reason to now start feeling guilty if you're carrying a baby and you have moments of stress or whatever is going on, because the human experience, the vast breadth of the human experience is part of that training, if you like, that babies need in order to survive in the world. They can't just be, singing around with unicorns and fluffy clouds, because that is not going to prepare them for the world that we live in, right? They need to know what loss feels like. They need to know what frustration and stress feels like. They need all of that, the whole color of the whole wide spectrum of the human experience. They need that. But when there's chronic stress or chronic anxiety, that's when we need to start maybe seeing what we can do to try and prevent a lot of that in mothers. And so that will also play a part, because if she has an anxious pregnancy, prenatal anxiety, then that is more likely to lead to her having a difficult birth, because she may not have the confidence in herself, she may not have the trust in her body, she might not have the support around her, she might not feel that she might cope with whatever's going on. And so that sets her up on the back foot. Whereas the woman that doesn't have that level of anxiety or fear during a pregnancy is in much better position to go in to have a positive birth for herself. But that still doesn't mean that just because the woman has a great time, and let's say great time, not all women are going to go, oh yeah, it was a great time, it was hard work and whatever they had. It's what the baby felt. How did the baby feel going down that birth canal? And what about the breech baby? That's like, well, I can't see a way out here. They're just looking at the back of the cave, feet first. They don't know what's going on, right? And they're
Yeah.
like, and this is a thing that comes up a lot in tokophobia, is this feeling of feeling trapped, like there's no way out. Well, maybe they're a breach
Mm,
because they couldn't see a way out.
mm,
Maybe the baby got a little bit of a shoulder caught up and had, felt a bit trapped. And maybe it was overwhelmed by the sheer power of contractions. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is too much for me. It's too powerful. I'm not in control. I'm feeling like I'm like, it was all too much. These are all themes that show up in tokophobia. And so that's the baby's experience. The mother might have not, they're two people at this point with a different consciousness. And we have not been paying enough attention or placing enough importance on what the baby is going through, and that the baby is actually a sentient being from very, very early on in the womb. And we need to get everybody up to speed on this, because this is impacting mental health and emotional health of everybody.
yeah,
Everybody.
absolutely. And I know, again, because my mother told me that she wasn't looking forward to me being born. I was a mistake. I came later than my sisters and was unexpected. And she wasn't in a great place with it. And my mother actually said to me once, I didn't want another baby. So, that was going on, and there was anxiety. She had anxieties, and she was on her own for a lot of the time. My father was away from home working, and even when she said, but when you arrived, that all of those issues disappeared, and I absolutely loved you. But that wasn't what was important, in a way, right? It was what was going on while I was growing in the womb that I'd picked up on and that grew with me. And then I joke sometimes with people. I don't know if it is so much of a joke, but I joke sometimes that being born with the cord around my neck, which I was my first attempt at self-sabotage, and me thinking, no, don't want to come out into this. Thank you very much. I'm checking out right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of these things, they of course, they stay with you. They've got to, because they're imprinted in your very cells
Yeah.
at that point.
And that's why tokophobia feels so visceral, because it is, because that's where it's coming from. When you kind of realize this, it just makes so much sense. But until somebody points it out to you, you're kind of like flailing around in the dark with it.
Yeah.
And I want to touch on when people talk about tokophobia, they talk about there's two types of tokophobia. There's primary tokophobia and secondary tokophobia. And I just want to talk about this because it's an important discussion point, I think. And also I want to tear it up because I think it's wrong. But let's just start with what is currently being talked about. So primary tokophobia is when a woman hasn't had a direct experience of birth or babies or any kind of womb action, if you like.
That's me. Me.
So yeah, and that was me. That was totally me.
Yeah.
And secondary tokophobia is where you've had a previous birth experience that was traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe maybe that was a miscarriage experience that was traumatic. But there's been maybe there's been a miscarriage, a stillbirth, or a pregnancy loss, or something there that has created a lot of trauma around birth. And so I think this secondary tokophobia is really the idea that it's rooted in trauma. That's got that right. Except the primary tokophobia, that is also rooted in trauma. But the birth, they still had a traumatic birth experience, but it was their own. And this is what's
Yeah.
being missed between these two types of tokophobia, is that some of it is it's all rooted in trauma. It just depends on what the trauma is. And so we've talked a lot about birth and our own birth experiences being the root trauma, but that's not the only trauma that I've come across in the work that I do. And other traumas could be sexual trauma, but the one that's completely blindsided me, that I also had this trauma and didn't know about it, which is puberty trauma. Like,
Yeah.
who's heard of puberty trauma? Not me until very recently, until I was working with a client. And yet, when you think about it, the idea of what's going on in puberty, your body is changing. Nature is in control. You have no control over this situation. You don't know whether you're going to get big boobs or small boobs. You don't know whether your period's going to come at 10 or when you're 14. Like, you have no say in any of this. That's exactly what's going on with pregnancy. You don't know if you're going to carry the baby forward and then from behind you're going to look like you're not even pregnant, or whether you're going to kind of balloon and glow and change radical shape. You don't know if you're going to get loads of morning sickness or preeclampsia or whatever. You don't know any of those things. And when the birth comes, again, birth is going to do its own thing. There's nothing you can do. You're just along for the ride. So this idea that there's these changes going on in the body that you have no control over, and if you haven't prepared or you haven't been supported, as many women, girls do, they're not prepared for puberty. Suddenly they start their bleed and they have no idea what's going on. And they're terrified. They think they're dying. So if we don't support our daughters through puberty, that could be traumatic. And I knew that mine was traumatic when, as I was helping my daughters, my eldest, prepare for her puberty, and she just said to me, she went, "Mummy, how old are you when you had your first period?" And I was like, "Oh," and I was like, "I don't know. I could have been 10. I could have been 14." And did I have pads? Did I? I had no information. It was like, oh, that's all been blanked out. And then I was like, holy shit, what does that mean? That means that
Yeah.
was a trauma, right?
Fascinating, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, and that's when I still haven't done it myself because she's walking around the house waving her pads around, and I'm like, oh, the shame, what are you doing? Can't even do that. Like, I've clearly got all this stuff around puberty that she hasn't because I helped her to prepare, right?
Yeah.
And she owns it. It's part of the female body and
Yeah.
she embraces it. I don't know if she embraces it. She definitely doesn't like it when it comes around, but definitely not where I'm at. And so that's another trauma that is not talked about that shows up in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. It's fascinating, that one. And I wasn't told about it before it happened. I was 11. I know I was 11 because I was told by a shocked mother that I started way earlier than my sisters did. And this was
Wow.
shocking to her. And I was also told not to speak to my father about it, which, so there was a shame instantly. Shame on me. But I don't know. Again, I mean, maybe that has impacted me as well, but I'm not aware of that one. Not as you are. I mean, I can remember it. I do remember not knowing what was happening to me because there was, yeah, and it was hiding. I was hiding my pants, and
Yeah, yeah,
like we all women do at puberty when they haven't been told what's going on because they don't know what's going on and they want to hide it.
yeah, yeah, because they think there's something wrong with them. I
Yeah,
know. And so, but these are the same patterns that you see in pregnancy, the
yeah,
same things that then make that act as triggers that are your areas of anxiety and fear, that this kind of all comes back up. And so, going back to what I was saying, which is like this difference between primary and secondary, there really isn't a difference because
mm,
all tocophobia is rooted in trauma. The difference between the two is one is rooted in a trauma that you know about and that you can point to, and the other one, you have no idea.
yeah,
You're like, and it's those with primary tocophobia that are the ones we need to try and reach, because those with secondary tocophobia, they're the ones that are already within the maternity system. They've already talking to their midwives. They've got babies when they go back and have their second birth. They're going to have a conversation about the first birth, and they can point to it. They can get the healing. They can get the support. But those that don't know where their trauma came from, where their tocophobia is, they're the ones that we need to kind of help
yeah.
as well, because until they know about it, how you can't heal something that you don't know is there.
No, no. And I think that for me, one of the most powerful things was to have the name and know that it was a thing and that it existed, and that knowing that I could deal with it, I could get it
Yeah.
out of my system. Yeah.
Yeah. I think knowing the name is huge. And you suddenly realize that you are not alone. This is a thing that is
Mm-hmm.
not about you. You're not broken or crazy or like I just thought I was a hot mess. it's a thing, and there's a reason why you have it, and actually there's a solution.
Yeah.
There's ways of healing it, but it also means that now you have a name, you can start Googling it, you can start finding out about it, you can start the research process, connect with other people that also have it. Because the thing about tocophobia is it's so isolating, because you think that you're this weird hot mess, that and the narrative, the word on the street is women want to get pregnant, they want babies. So if you come along and like, no, not me, then there's like, well, who's this crazy person over here that doesn't want kids? And the childless conversation is a bit more accepted now, but it's still not an easy conversation for many women to have, because a lot of people don't understand. It's a maternal instinct. Surely you want to have babies.
Yeah. And on the other hand, it might be useful to understand where that not unwillingness to have children comes from,
yeah,
right? So you might say, oh, right, okay, I've made a decision. I don't want children. Is that your decision, or is that the tokophobia speaking?
yeah,
Now, I don't know. I'm not making any judgments here at all, but it's curious. I'd be curious to know, wouldn't you?
yeah, yeah. And I've had a lot of women come to me who want to make that decision about having kids, and they're not sure whether they're making that decision or the fear is. And that's words that they use in their email to me. They went, I want to make sure that I'm making the decision and the fear isn't making the decision for me.
Yeah.
So I want to work with you so that I can understand whether or not I want kids or not. And so just because you don't want kids doesn't mean that you have tocophobia.
Yeah.
And once you heal your tocophobia, it doesn't mean you will automatically go on to have kids. Those two they're just different things. But it is possible for when you've healed your tocophobia that you realize that kids is not for you. And you're like, yeah, you know what? I don't want this for myself. I've got other things I want to do with my life. I want to travel. I want to go into academia. I want to study. I want to write loads of books. I'm going to launch a business, and I've got other shit I want to get done with my life. It doesn't include kids, because we all know that, being a mother, that's a consuming activity, okay? And that reduces your bandwidth. And it takes a lot of financial resources that you could, be using elsewhere. So it's not for everyone, and that's fine. We need all people to make this diverse, wonderful planet that we have. And that includes people that aren't mothers, because you can mother in different ways. You can birth different types of things, right? But if you're not making that decision from your heart, then you risk later on. Because when the fear is speaking, the fear, at some point the fear goes. And because once you're no longer have the threat of pregnancy, so once you reach the end of your fertile years and that threat subsides, that's when a lot of women realize that it was fear. And then they're like, holy, now the risk isn't there. Like, oh, I kind of think I should. Maybe I think I wanted kids. I've had so many conversations with women like that where they've reached the other end and they're like, I think I really wanted kids, and that was fear. And I wish I'd known about that back then.
Yeah. I know that since I, let go of my fear, let go of the tokophobia, I've had to move through those feelings of, oh wow, how different could my life have been if I'd known about this, and if it had been, if I'd let go of the tokophobia, if I'd let go of that underlying huge terror, how different could my life have been? And on the one hand, there's no point in looking back and regretting. I don't regret, but there have been feelings coming up, which have been very deep again, of, oh wow, look at what I missed out on. Yeah. So it's as well to deal with it.
Yeah. And I also think that is also the reason why many don't, because as long as they have it, they can still turn to that, and they've got a reason why. Well, no, I haven't conquered it because I've got tocophobia. And then you heal it, and then you're confronted with making peace with some past decisions, some past actions, some past life experiences, and then that requires a whole new level of healing. And that can be, I know I've had women coming to me after their childbearing years, saying, I just need to make peace with the fact that I didn't have kids. Can you just
Yeah.
help me get to that place of peace
Yeah.
around this issue? And so we had to go through healing the tocophobia and then healing the grief for the life they didn't have.
Yeah.
And
That's exactly what's been coming up for me. It's a grief for the life I didn't have. Yeah.
yeah. And this is what makes me so mad is this is so unnecessary. We've known about tocophobia for years, but why is it not? I might end up going in a bit of a rant, and I'm going to try not to. But it's like we don't know enough
Go
about.
on.
We still don't know about the menopause, right? There's still no research really going on the menopause. It's a
No.
female issue that hasn't been studied enough and that hasn't been prioritized. That's why. But the time for that is over, and that's why we're doing this because we're going to pull it out of the pregnancy and birth space, which does a very good job of keeping to itself, unfortunately. And this is no criticism, because I was in that space. I am in that space, and I want us to be proud about the work, the important work that we do with pregnancy and birth, because this is the ripple effect that's going to spread throughout the whole of humanity if you get that bit right. If you help women to have amazing births, everything else comes from that, you know. But we need to be taking this seriously across the general population with men too, because they are suffering from this as well as women. And even if they're not suffering directly in the way that they might realize, they're suffering in their relationships. They're suffering in like, oh, I've now got to divorce this person and go and find somebody else because she can't have babies, even though we both want them. And what must that do to a guy, right? So this is affecting everyone,
Mm.
everyone.
Yeah.
And it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary.
Yeah. And that's why I'm very, very happy to be joining you on this, because I don't want anybody to go through life like I did, not being able to achieve what you're absolutely capable of achieving because of this deep, deep-seated fear.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we'll leave it there for today. JJ.
Good place to leave it.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to leave it. We're going to be obviously coming back and exploring a lot of these areas in a lot
We are.
more detail because there's so much to be said around this. There's so many aspects to explore. And so, yeah, stay tuned for the next conversation we have as part of this series of conversations on Tik-Tokophobia. Thank you for
Absolutely.
listening and watching.
Yeah. See you on the next one.